A grieving teenager welcomes her father's new wife, a woman adored by neighbors and admired by all. But beneath the flawless facade lies a pattern of secrets, manipulation, and danger. When the mask slips, survival depends on uncovering the truth hidden in the basement before it's too late. Let's jumping into story. Rachel pushed open the front door with the same heaviness she carried every afternoon. The hallway smelled of cinnamon, warm and staged, like the air fresheners in a real estate office. She dropped her backpack on the hardwood floor and caught sight of Marissa in the kitchen. The woman stood by the counter with a tray of cookies arranged in careful rows, a soft glow from the late sunlight touching her hair in a halo. Rachel's father had married her only 6 months ago, but already Marissa had slid into the house like she belonged there forever. She smiled too much, talked too sweetly, moved as if the whole world adored her. Everyone did. Except Rachel. Mark never noticed the sharp edge in Marissa's tone when he stepped out of the room. He never saw the flash of irritation that tightened her face when Rachel refused a compliment. To him, she was perfection itself. To Rachel, she was a stranger who had pushed her way into their grief and rearranged it until nothing felt like home. The tray of cookies waited on the counter like a peace offering. Rachel ignored them, heading straight for the stairs. As she passed the kitchen doorway, she glanced at the window above the sink. Marissa's reflection stared back, the smile gone, the softness erased. For a brief second, the mask dropped, leaving a face that looked cold and calculating. Rachel froze, caught by the transformation. Marissa's real expression vanished as quickly as it appeared. When Rachel turned back, she wore the same cheerful brightness, her hands folded neatly against the apron tied around her waist. Rachel's chest tightened. She felt like she had seen something not meant for her eyes. She hurried upstairs and shut her bedroom door, the sound of the latch oddly reassuring. The house had always felt too quiet since her mother's death, but now the silence pressed in differently. It wasn't absence anymore, it was surveillance. Marissa's presence filled every hallway, every corner, every shadow. Rachel imagined her listening, smiling, plotting. She tried to shake the thought and turned on her desk lamp, forcing herself to focus on homework. The numbers blurred, her pencil tapping restlessly against the paper. Downstairs, she heard the muffled sound of her father's voice as he returned home, followed by the bright trill of Marissa's laughter. The performance had begun again, the perfect wife slipping into her role with flawless ease. Rachel set her pencil down. Her pulse drummed in her ears. Something about the reflection in the window refused to leave her mind. It was only a flicker, but flickers revealed truth. She had seen the woman behind the mask. The evening dragged on with the sound of silverware and the faint hum of a dishwasher. Rachel stayed in her room, not hungry, not trusting. When the house finally grew quiet, she pulled the covers to her chin and stared at the ceiling. She told herself she might be imagining it, that grief had made her suspicious of anyone who tried to take her mother's place. Yet the image of that empty, icy face lingered in the dark, refusing to fade. Sleep came late, unsettled and restless. By the time she drifted off, the thought had rooted itself deep inside her. Marissa was not what she seemed. Morning light filtered through the blinds in soft lines, cutting across Rachel's room like bars. She dressed slowly, dragging out each motion until she could no longer delay stepping into the world Marissa had polished to a shine. The kitchen was already spotless, the counters gleaming, breakfast prepared with clinical precision. Mark sat at the table, his tie already knotted, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been for years. Rachel studied him for a moment. He looked lighter now, almost younger, as if Marissa's presence had lifted some invisible burden from his shoulders. He didn't notice the stiffness in Rachel's jaw or the way she avoided the plate waiting for her. He never noticed anymore. The school bus ride blurred past in the same daze it always carried. But her thoughts stayed anchored at home. When she returned that afternoon, she found Marissa standing by the driveway, chatting with a neighbor. The neighbor's face lit up in admiration as Marissa handed her a neatly wrapped casserole dish. Rachel lingered at the edge of the yard, invisible, watching how easily Marissa slipped into the role of beloved community figure. Inside, more signs of perfection greeted her. Fresh flowers stood in a vase by the entryway, petals arranged as if for a magazine spread. A scented candle flickered on the coffee table, filling the living room with a warm, artificial comfort. Marissa moved through the space like a hostess preparing for guests who never left, always graceful, always curated. Rachel searched for cracks in the facade. She scanned the counters for clutter, peeked into corners for something misplaced, but everything lay in order, as though Marissa had rehearsed every detail. The control unsettled her. No one lived this clean, this precise, without reason. At dinner, neighbors' praises reached her ears again. Mark shared stories of how Marissa had joined the local charity committee, how everyone seemed impressed with her energy and kindness. Rachel chewed her food in silence, her throat tight with words she couldn't say. Each compliment stacked higher, building walls around her that she could not break. Afterward, she escaped upstairs, retreating into the only space Marissa hadn't invaded completely. Yet even here, Rachel felt the woman's reach. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender, the laundry folded in tidy stacks at the end of her bed. Even the order in her closet betrayed someone else's touch. Night fell with the usual rhythm. Mark read in his chair, Marissa arranged things in the kitchen with quiet efficiency, and Rachel sat on her bed, tracing shapes into her notebook with a dull pencil. She felt surrounded, suffocated by a perfection that didn't belong to her and never could. In the distance, she heard laughter drifting from the downstairs window, the kind of laughter that pulled admiration from anyone who heard it. To everyone else, Marissa was flawless, a miracle who had transformed a grieving home into a place of warmth. To Rachel, she was a performance that never ended, a mask that grew heavier with every passing day. Rachel closed her eyes and tried to picture her life before, when the air carried flaws, when her mother's voice had filled the house with real warmth instead of practiced charm. The contrast stung. The perfect facade felt less like comfort and more like a trap waiting to close. Rachel woke in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. The house usually slept in silence, but this sound moved with purpose, light and steady, as if someone drifted across the floors without caring who heard. She held her breath and listened. A door opened below, followed by the faint scrape of wood. Then came the low murmur of a voice. She slipped from her bed and pressed her ear against the floor. The voice carried upward, muffled, hurried, sharp in tone. It belonged to Marissa. Rachel could not catch every word, but she heard pauses, as though someone spoke back on the other end of a phone. The rhythm of the whispers chilled her. They carried urgency, secrecy, the kind of sound people made only when they had something to hide. Rachel waited until the footsteps faded and the silence returned. She crawled back under the covers, her skin prickling, her mind racing. The image of Marissa in the kitchen window returned, that fleeting look of cold emptiness. Now, paired with the whispers, it grew heavier, more dangerous. The next day, the routine resumed. Marissa moved through the house in her usual graceful way, smiling at Mark, arranging flowers, offering food. Rachel refused. Yet behind each movement, Rachel saw something hidden. She replayed the whispers again and again, convinced that a double life pulsed beneath the surface of every smile. After school, Rachel lingered outside the house instead of going straight in. She watched the windows from the sidewalk, trying to catch Marissa unprepared. The curtains shifted once, as though someone checked the street. Rachel ducked behind a tree, her breath quick, her body tense. When she peeked again, the window looked calm, nothing unusual, only the same neat drapes. Her suspicion grew heavier. She began noticing other oddities. Marissa's explanations about errands never matched the time she returned. Receipts in the trash carried names of stores from different towns. Even her voice changed sometimes, lighter, younger, as if she adjusted it depending on the audience. Rachel's father remained blind. He praised Marissa's kindness at dinner, spoke of her generosity, shared stories of neighbors who admired her. Rachel sat with clenched fists under the table, each word pressing her deeper into frustration. She longed to tell him what she had heard at night, the strange whispers that made her skin crawl, but she knew he would dismiss her. He always dismissed her concerns as jealousy. That night, Rachel stayed awake on purpose. She waited with the lamp off, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening for sounds. Hours passed, the house still and dark. Then, near midnight, faint movement stirred again. The creak of a stair, the hush of a door. She tiptoed to her bedroom door and eased it open. The hallway glowed faintly from the nightlight plugged into the wall. Rachel padded to the top of the stairs and crouched low. Below, she caught sight of Marissa's shadow stretching long across the kitchen tile. Her head tilted, phone pressed to her ear, her figure stiff and deliberate. The whispering began again, harsher this time, filled with tension. Rachel's breath caught. She could not hear words, but she felt meaning. Secrets lived in those whispers, heavy enough to bend the air. She knew then that whatever Marissa pretended to be during the day, something else emerged at night. Something sharper, darker, and far more dangerous. Rachel woke groggy but determined. The memory of the night pressed against her chest like a weight, urging her toward proof. She needed something tangible, something that showed Marissa's perfection cracked at the edges. When the afternoon sun slanted across the living room, she noticed Marissa's car missing from the driveway. The house held that peculiar stillness that came only when Rachel was alone. She seized the chance. Moving quickly, she searched the downstairs rooms first, pulling open drawers, lifting lids, scanning for anything that felt out of place. Every surface gleamed, every corner looked arranged. The order itself felt suffocating, like someone erasing every trace of human mess to cover something else. Her steps carried her to the basement door. She stood staring at it, the memory of Marissa's warning echoing in her mind. The handle felt cold when she gripped it. The door opened with a soft groan and stale air rose from below. The basement smelled of dust and paint. Light bulbs hummed weakly above, throwing shadows across stacks of boxes and shelves lined with tools. Rachel scanned the room, her pulse racing. Most of the boxes were labeled Christmas lights, old clothes, family photos. Yet in the far corner a trunk sat by itself, heavy and locked. Rachel crouched beside it, brushing dust from the surface. The lock gleamed newer than the rest of the trunk, polished and firm, as if it had been added recently. She tugged at it, but it held fast. Her heart pounded with the thrill of discovery and the frustration of barriers. Whatever Marissa wanted hidden, it lay here. She leaned closer, noticing faint scratches along the wood, as if the trunk had been moved often. A chill crept up her arms. She felt sure that answers lived inside, answers Marissa would never willingly share. The thought of her father's face, blind with devotion, tightened her resolve. Footsteps creaked above. Rachel froze. The sound of a door closing reached her ears, followed by Marissa's light tread across the floorboards. Panic surged. She scrambled back, brushing dust from her knees, searching for a reason to be in the basement. Her hands shook as she adjusted a paint can on a shelf, trying to look busy. The basement door opened at the top of the stairs. Light spilled down, framing Marissa's silhouette. For a moment she stood still, watching. Rachel's skin prickled under the weight of that gaze. Then Marissa stepped away, the door clicking shut again. Rachel exhaled sharply, her chest heaving. The message was clear. Marissa had seen her, had noticed, and had allowed her to retreat without a word. That silence felt more dangerous than confrontation. She climbed the stairs slowly, aware that the house no longer felt like hers. Each step carried the sense of being monitored, judged, recorded. The locked trunk remained behind, waiting like a secret too heavy to keep forever. That night, Rachel lay awake again, staring at the shadows on her ceiling. She had found something real, something solid. A locked trunk meant secrets, and secrets meant danger. The days that followed blurred into a performance staged by Marissa. The house no longer felt like a home, but like a set she controlled. Every scene tailored to convince Mark that she was flawless. Rachel watched her father fall deeper under the spell, his smiles softer, his laughter more frequent, his trust unshakable. Rachel carried the image of the locked trunk in her mind, heavy and urgent. She wanted to tell him about it, to describe how Marissa's figure had stood framed in the basement doorway, as if she had caught Rachel trespassing. Yet when she opened her mouth, the words dried. She already knew what would happen. He would look at her with patient eyes, then dismiss it as jealousy. Evidence worked against her. Little things began to shift. A glass she had left on the table appeared shattered on the floor, and Marissa claimed Rachel had broken it. Homework went missing from her desk drawer, and Marissa hinted that Rachel had misplaced it through carelessness. Even her phone disappeared one afternoon, only to be discovered later beneath the couch cushions where she knew she had never placed it. Mark believed each story. He shook his head with gentle disappointment, telling Rachel to be more careful, to show respect, to accept Marissa's guidance. Each correction cut deeper than the last. Marissa hovered behind him with sympathetic eyes, a hand on his shoulder, the picture of concern. The gaslight burned brighter each day. Rachel found herself questioning her own memory, wondering if perhaps she had been careless, if grief had left her clumsy. Yet the cold certainty in Marissa's gaze each time they crossed paths told her otherwise. None of this happened by accident. One afternoon, Rachel discovered a phone hidden in Marissa's purse while searching for evidence in the laundry room. The device wasn't the one Marissa used openly. This one held coded messages, strings of numbers, and short words that hinted at plans and timelines. Rachel copied them down quickly, her hands trembling. Later, she showed them to Jess, who leaned over the notes with wide eyes. Together, they pieced fragments, mentions of inheritance, patience, and final step. The words spread dread through Rachel like ice water. She felt certain they pointed to her father, to his money, to a plan that ended in ruin. When Rachel tried to confront her father again, Marissa moved first. The phone disappeared, the notes shredded, and the evidence dissolved. Mark only heard Marissa's version, Rachel sneaking into her things, inventing lies, spinning wild stories to sabotage the marriage. The disappointment in his eyes turned sharp. He grounded Rachel, restricted her movements, and told her to focus on her schoolwork. Marissa stood silently in the corner, her face calm, her eyes bright with victory. Rachel retreated to her room, the walls closing in around her. She had proof once, but Marissa erased it with ease, twisting truth into lies, making Rachel the villain in her own home. The weight of isolation grew unbearable. Still, beneath the frustration and fear, a stubborn spark remained. Marissa had covered her tracks, but Rachel knew the secret trunk waited in the basement. Whatever hid inside would speak louder than coded messages or whispered phone calls. That trunk was the only way forward. Rain fell hard against the windows that night, the sound steady and relentless. Rachel sat awake in her room, the storm outside echoing the turmoil inside her. She could no longer trust the safety of her own home. Every glance from Marissa carried weight. Every smile sharpened into warning. Near midnight, the floor creaked beneath measured steps. Rachel held her breath, moving silently to her door. She cracked it just enough to see the hallway glow faintly in the nightlight. Marissa's figure slipped down the stairs, phone clutched tight in her hand. Rachel followed at a distance, pausing on the landing. Below, Marissa's voice carried over the storm. The words flowed sharp and clipped, each one carved with tension. Rachel leaned closer, straining to hear through the drum of rain. Fragments reached her ears. "You promised it would be soon." A pause. Then, "The girl is suspicious. She needs to be handled." The words struck like a blow. Rachel gripped the railing, her knuckles pale. Her. She was no longer only an obstacle to Marissa's performance, but a threat, a danger to whatever plan unfolded in secret. The implication chilled her to the bone. The call ended, and silence reclaimed the house. Rachel retreated to her room, heart racing. Fear pulsed through her veins, but clarity sharpened alongside it. Marissa would not stop. The inheritance, the timelines, the whispers, they all pointed toward something final, something violent. Morning came gray and heavy. Rachel tried to reach her father again, desperate to make him understand. But Marissa's hand reached first, shaping the story before Rachel could speak. She spoke of disobedience, of Rachel sneaking through drawers, of her unhealthy fixation. Mark listened, his jaw set, his faith in his wife unshaken. Rachel pleaded with her eyes, but he looked past her, convinced she had lost control. His words cut sharper than any lock or whispered threat. He believed Marissa, and nothing Rachel said could pierce the bond. The walls closed tighter. Rachel spent the afternoon in her room, pacing, planning, searching for a way to act before Marissa struck. The trunk in the basement returned to her thoughts like a beacon. Whatever lay inside would reveal truth no one could deny. Without it, she remained trapped in a web spun against her. That night, she crept downstairs when the house finally slept. She stood at the top of the basement steps, her pulse drumming. The darkness below seemed to breathe, pulling her in. She descended carefully, each stair creaking under her weight. The trunk waited in the corner, its lock gleaming. Rachel pulled a hairpin from her pocket, trembling as she pressed it into the keyhole. The storm outside masked the sound of her attempts, the metal scratching, bending, slipping. Sweat dampened her palms. At last, the lock clicked faintly, loosening under pressure. Her chest lifted with victory. But the moment froze when the floor above groaned. Rachel stiffened. A shadow shifted at the top of the stairs. She held her breath, waiting, but no one descended. The silence pressed harder than footsteps, filled with threat. She closed the trunk without opening it fully and crept back upstairs. The storm roared outside, but inside the house danger brewed quiet and patient. The trap had been set. The storm returned 2 nights later, darker and heavier than before. Thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the walls. Rain lashed against the glass, turning the house into a fragile shell amid chaos. Rachel stood by her window, heart pounding with the certainty that tonight would decide everything. She waited until the house quieted. Mark's door closed upstairs, his steady footsteps fading into stillness. Marissa moved once more through the halls, her shadow drifting across the crack beneath Rachel's door. When the sound of her movement vanished, Rachel knew her chance had come. She crept to the basement door, her pulse drumming in her ears louder than the rain. The handle turned with ease this time, the door swinging open with a groan swallowed by thunder. The air below smelled damp and heavy, charged with the scent of secrets long buried. Rachel descended, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam cut across the concrete floor, slicing through dust and shadow. Boxes lined the walls, but her gaze fixed on the trunk, waiting in the corner like a silent sentinel. The lock she had weakened gave way with little effort now. Metal clinked against the floor, sharp and final. She lifted the lid. Inside, old newspaper clippings lay stacked in careful order. Headlines screamed tragedies: wealthy men dead under suspicious circumstances, their grieving wives vanishing soon after. Photos showed faces blurred by time, but one detail burned clear. Each wife bore a striking resemblance to Marissa. Different names, different towns, but always the same eyes, the same smile. Rachel's breath caught as she flipped through the clippings. Marriage licenses, death certificates, fragments of lives consumed and discarded. The truth glared at her from every yellowed page. Marissa was no ordinary stepmother. She was a predator who had built a life out of seduction and destruction. The basement door creaked above. Rachel froze, the flashlight beam trembling over the trunk. A shadow stretched down the stairs, long and deliberate. Marissa's figure appeared in the doorway, framed by lightning, her face calm and composed. Rachel's chest tightened. She stepped back, the papers spilling across the floor. Marissa descended slowly, each step measured, her eyes locked on Rachel with chilling steadiness. The mask of kindness had vanished completely now. In its place stood a cold certainty. A predator revealed. The storm raged outside, but inside the basement silence pressed heavy. Marissa approached with a grace that felt predatory, her presence filling the room. Rachel's instincts screamed to run, but her body held still, pinned by the weight of those eyes. Marissa stopped beside the trunk, her hand brushing the scattered clippings. The storm's light flickered across her face, illuminating a smile that no longer pretended warmth. It was sharp, unyielding, the smile of someone who had played this game many times before. Rachel's pulse hammered. She grabbed the flashlight like a weapon, her grip tight, her arms shaking. She knew Marissa would not hesitate, not now, not after the mask had fallen. Before Marissa could move, a sound split the air. Mark's voice carried down the stairs, sharp and alarmed, breaking the spell. His figure appeared at the top, frozen at the sight of his wife standing over the evidence, his daughter clutching the light. His face shifted, confusion giving way to horror as he saw the truth spread across the basement floor. The storm roared louder, as if answering the revelation. The basement filled with the storm's voice, thunder cracking against the walls as if the sky itself had broken open. Mark stood frozen at the top of the stairs, his eyes darting between his daughter and his wife. Papers littered the floor, the proof undeniable. For the first time, Rachel saw doubt shatter his trust. Marissa's composure slipped for a heartbeat. The smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of calculation, her mind racing. Then the mask returned, colder now, sharpened into a weapon. She stepped closer to Rachel, her body tense, ready to silence the girl who had uncovered everything. Rachel lifted the flashlight like a shield. Fear surged through her, but beneath it burned a fiercer energy. She would not let Marissa win. The storm outside beat against the windows, echoing the pounding of her heart. Mark descended the stairs slowly, his gaze fixed on the clippings scattered across the floor. Recognition spread across his face as he connected names, places, deaths, and the woman standing before him. The weight of truth pressed heavy, and his denial crumbled. Marissa sensed it too. Her hand clenched into a fist, her posture rigid. The predator had been unmasked, and her audience no longer believed. The performance was over. Rachel edged backward, her feet brushing the concrete. She imagined every victim whose story lay in those papers, every family shattered, every life consumed. The basement felt haunted, not by ghosts but by the history of one woman's hunger. The sirens arrived before Marissa could act. The neighbors had called the police after hearing shouts through the storm. The pounding at the door grew louder, followed by the crash of officers forcing their way inside. Mark shouted for them, his voice breaking with urgency. Heavy boots thundered down the stairs. Flashlights cut through the gloom, beams crossing Rachel's trembling frame, Mark's pale face, and Marissa's motionless stance. The officers moved fast, pulling Rachel aside, pinning Marissa's arms. She did not fight, she only watched, her eyes locked on Rachel, her expression calm in the chaos. The storm outside began to ease as Marissa was led up the stairs. Rain softened against the glass, thunder rolled farther into the distance, and silence returned. Rachel stood beside her father, her knees weak, her body trembling with exhaustion. Relief mixed with sorrow, too heavy to separate. Mark turned to her, his face lined with regret, his eyes wet with apology. Rachel felt the weight of his embrace as he pulled her close. She wanted to believe safety had returned, but unease lingered. Trust could not erase scars so quickly. As officers guided Marissa through the doorway, she turned her head one last time. Her eyes locked on Rachel, steady and unblinking. A faint smile curved her lips, not of defeat but of promise. The stormlight flickered across her face, etching the expression into Rachel's mind. The stormlight flickered across her face, etching the expression into Rachel's mind. The door closed behind her, the echo loud in the stillness. The house stood quiet once more, yet Rachel knew it would never feel the same. She had seen behind the mask, had fought to be believed, had survived the predator in her own home. But Marissa's smile lingered, a shadow that would never fade, a reminder that perfection often hides the darkest truths. Thanks for listening. Hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe.